You don't have to come since you're not really part of the family, Rebecca. But I can't just not show up. Well, you can come, but only if you do all the cooking. Okay, I understand. Don't tell David and the others about this, okay? Sure. I'm Rebecca, 37 years old. I married David 3 years ago, and we have a 3-year-old son. We're a family of 3. Every summer we visit David's family, and during Christmas we go to my parents' house. But this year, due to strong requests from my mother-in-law Stacy and sister-in-law Laura, we decided to spend Christmas at David's family home, and started hurried preparations in December. Stacy had been bullying me, and recently told me not to come in a sarcastic tone. However, I couldn't just stay away, so on Christmas Eve, we drove for 2 hours to reach David's family home. We planned to stay for 3 nights, so I packed a large Boston bag with clothes and loaded the car with food and gifts for the stay. Upon arrival, Laura, David's sister, her husband, and daughter were already there. When I entered the house, Stacy and Laura greeted me warmly and seemed genuinely happy to receive the gifts I brought. Then, with a smile, Stacy said, "You must be tired from the long journey." Her kind demeanor, so different from how she behaves when we're alone, sent chills down my spine. Not only Stacy, but Laura too had been cold to me from the start, joining in the bullying. Stacy treated me like I was poor and blatantly said I didn't fit in with her family. Laura often pressured me to get a divorce. I thought about telling David about the bullying many times, but I didn't want to hurt him, so I kept silent. David believes Stacy and Laura are kind-hearted people. Plus, I didn't want to give up this normal life I had. So I thought enduring it just during family visits was enough. After arriving and chatting with everyone, we headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. Suddenly, Stacy suggested handing out Christmas cards. At that time, only I, my son, Stacy, Laura, and Laura's daughter Donna were at home. David and the others had gone to a nearby grocery store to buy alcohol and were not around. In hindsight, I think Stacy had planned this moment. First, she gave Laura's daughter a Christmas card with money inside. It contained $100. The niece, only 6, didn't quite understand the value of $100, but was thrilled to hear she could buy toys with it. I felt giving a 6-year-old $100 was a bit much, but considering the wealthy lifestyle of my husband's family, it seems reasonable. Above all, Stacy adored her niece. That day she hugged her, saying, "So cute, so adorable," while nuzzling her cheek. In contrast, she had never shown such affection to my son. I guess a daughter's child is just more endearing. A daughter-in-law's child is, after all, someone else's. As I was thinking this, Stacy gave my son a Christmas card. The way she handed it over felt so indifferent, devoid of love, but I was relieved she treated my son equally. I was worried her mistreatment of me might extend to him, but even Stacy wouldn't do such a thing to her grandchild, it seemed. I thanked Stacy and urged my son to do the same. "Say thank you to Grandma." Then Stacy remarked, "Can't he even say thank you on his own? What kind of upbringing is that?" My son is 3 and can say thank you, but he seems to sense Stacy's constant bullying of me and is uncomfortable around her, so he rarely speaks in her presence. Looking down, my son heard Stacy say, "He's the ugliest of all my grandchildren." Even at 3, he understood the insult. He tensed up and hid behind me. I raised my voice. "How can you say such a thing?" But she nonchalantly said, "It's just a joke, a joke. Come on, open it and see what's inside." I wanted to return the card and leave, but my son bravely said thank you and opened it. I watched, suppressing my anger, as he opened the envelope. When he did, I saw something other than money inside. Thinking Stacy had considerately put in stickers or something for a 3-year-old, I was curious. But as my son pulled it out, it was just a dry leaf. Stunned, I couldn't comprehend what Stacy said. A poor child needs nothing more than a single leaf. I was speechless at Stacy, who said this with a mean laugh. I initially thought it was a joke, but Stacy was seriously harassing us. Laura, having witnessed this, it was a great idea after all. Rebecca's face is priceless, she said mockingly, laughing at me. They had conspired together in this cruelty. I could endure them mocking me, but doing this to my son was unbearable. I hit my limit and confronted Stacy. This is too much. If it's just a leaf, we're better off without it. Then Laura, with a devilish face, yelled at me. Huh? You're saying it's a bother, even though Mom went out of her way to give it to you. Laura's words were echoed by Stacy. That's right. This is a dry leaf from a tree in my garden that I've lovingly cared for. You should be grateful. Both Stacy and Laura brushed off my concerns, insisting I should be thankful even for a single leaf. Why are you being so cruel? Have I done something wrong? My husband's an accountant and her husband's a doctor. David works at a big corporation too, she said, raising her voice. Laura added, We're a wealthy family, an elite one. You married David just to get your hands on our family's wealth. Then it clicked. They disliked that I had become part of their elite family circle and were trying to drive me out. Of course I didn't marry David for his money. Hurt by their untrue accusations, I started crying. Seeing me crying and downcast, my niece, who was a bit away, came over concerned. Aunt Rebecca, are you crying? Are you hurt somewhere? I thanked my innocent, concerned niece. No, I'm fine, thank you. Then Laura quickly intervened. Aunt Rebecca has a stomachache. Come on, let's go. It's almost time for dinner. She whisked my niece away into the living room, seemingly to cover up the situation. Realizing I shouldn't show such a face to my niece or son, I wiped my tears and decided to start preparing the meal. With my niece's arrival, Stacy and Laura stopped their bullying, and I was able to focus on cooking in silence. As expected, neither of them looked after my son, so I let him play in the kitchen while I prepared some appetizers. While cooking, I couldn't help but cry again, thinking about why I had to endure such pain just to visit my husband's family. Just then, David and the others returned. I quickly put on a smile, not wanting them to see my tears, and went to greet them at the entrance. Stacy and Laura, who had been so mean just moments ago, now wore kind faces. Father-in-law Robert and brother-in-law John were utterly unaware of their cruelty, believing them to be kind people. Robert, with a gentle smile, carried the chicken they had bought into the living room. John happily went to the living room with his niece, and Laura followed them, looking content. To anyone just observing, they seemed like a truly happy family, but their true nature was completely different from what they had shown earlier. Even so, I didn't have the courage to disrupt this family's happiness. There were more harassments when no one else was looking, but I managed to get through the 3-night stay and return home. Finally, free from that hellish place, I was relaxing in the living room when David asked me, "Did something happen at home? You looked unhappy the whole time." I was surprised that David had noticed, but I pretended as if nothing had happened. "Really? Nothing's wrong," I said, but David wasn't convinced. I felt a mix of happiness and guilt when I realized David was so concerned about me. I hadn't planned to tell anyone about the abuse from the 2 women, but his kindness made me tear up, and I ended up sharing everything. I told him how they've been making snide remarks since we got married, calling me poor, a thief, urging me to divorce and leave. I even told him about the single dried leaf given as a Christmas gift to our son. As I recounted what I endured over the past 3 years, David's face turned red with shock and anger, trembling with rage. Showing him the dry leaf as evidence only fueled his fury more. David apologized, still angry. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize this was happening." It wasn't his fault, as he didn't know about the bullying. Moreover, I also had been hiding a truth about my family from his family, which was wrong. I guess I can't keep it a secret anymore. Thinking of my son, I realized I had to tell Stacy and the others about my family background. For that, I needed my parents' support. I called my mother and told her what had happened with Stacy and Laura. I could tell from her voice, though calm, she was angry. Thankfully, both of my parents agreed to help, so David and I decided to visit his family home over the weekend to discuss everything. That weekend, at David's family home, Stacy, Laura, Robert, David, John, and I gathered. My niece was playing in the garden, and my son was napping in the next room. Robert seemed happy that everyone was together again, smiling. Seeing him like that, I felt terribly guilty about what I had to reveal. Sensing my feelings, David started the conversation. "Mom, Laura, I know everything you've done to Rebecca. What's this about?" David's words momentarily surprised them, but they soon feigned ignorance. "What are you talking about?" Stacy said, and Laura joined in. "David, are you just tired?" Despite their efforts to deflect, David shared everything I had been through in front of everyone, even showing the dry leaf and the Christmas card on the table for Robert and John to see. Their faces stiffened gradually. "Is this true?" Robert asked David, incredulous. When David confirmed the truth, Stacy, with a flushed, panicked face, said, "Don't make false accusations without proof." Stacy and Laura, sweating and denying it all, looked increasingly guilty, and even John started to look at Laura with suspicion. Indeed, I hadn't recorded their actions, so the leaf was the only physical evidence. But their panic was evident. Anyone would believe David's account as true. As David pressed on, they became more flustered. Then my niece, who had been playing outside, came into the living room and saw the dry leaf on the table. "Oh, this is what Grandma gave in the Christmas card the other day." My niece's innocent remark struck a blow to Stacy and Laura, who froze in panic. Meanwhile, John and Robert were furious. Then my niece asked, "Is Aunt Rebecca poor?" Confused, John asked her, "Why would you say that?" She innocently replied, "Mom and the others said that, and they made Aunt Rebecca cry." With that, she went back to play in the garden. Her decisive statement left Stacy and Laura even more flustered. John looked at his wife with disgust, and Robert sharply criticized Stacy, calling her the worst. Accused by everyone, the two women lashed out. "It's David's fault for marrying a poor person." Laura yelled at David, with Stacy joining in. "Rebecca doesn't belong in this family. I've said it from the start." They began trying to convince David to divorce me, to protect the family wealth. Aghast, David retorted, "Who ever said Rebecca is poor?" and opened the living room door. In came my parents. Stacy and Laura were confused by the sudden appearance of my parents. My parents had come today, as I had asked them over the phone. Stacy, bewildered, said, "What are Rebecca's parents doing here all of a sudden?" My mother, remaining calm, said, "We've heard about the situation. Our daughter seems to be quite indebted to you." I could tell my parents were quite angry, despite their calm demeanor. As my parents were greeting everyone, a remorseful Robert apologized. "I'm sorry for the foolishness of our family. We've been horrible to your precious daughter." John also apologized, but the true culprits were the two women. My father asked Robert to stop apologizing and turned to Stacy and Laura. "We haven't had the chance to properly introduce ourselves. We're like this, you see." He handed them his business card. Stacy, thinking we were poor, carelessly accepted it with one hand. Laura, seemingly uninterested, took the card and handed it to John without a second glance. Upon seeing the cards, Robert and John's faces showed shock. Understandably so. My father's card listed the name of a well-known local company with CEO beside his name. My mother's card read Executive Director. Their company is a famous one known to everyone. In fact, my family comes from a long line of distinguished lineage, and my parents are the main operators of the company. In other words, far from being poor, my family is super wealthy. Even housewives like Stacy and Laura knew of my parents' company, and were speechless with surprise. While surprised, Robert was curious why we had kept the truth hidden until now. Feeling apologetic for not telling Robert and John earlier, I decided to explain why I had concealed the facts about my family. I had always been troubled by being wealthy since I was young. The people who approached me were either after money or adults trying to please my parents. No one ever interacted with me sincerely, leaving me unable to trust anyone. Then I met David, and our relationship developed. We dated for 3 years, and David proposed to me. I was scared to tell the truth, but I couldn't keep it a secret if we were to marry, so I revealed everything about my family background. Despite this, David didn't change at all. Usually, when I mention being wealthy, people's attitudes change, and they would start asking for money, but David was different. I trusted David and decided to marry him. The reason I didn't tell David's family about my own was that I wanted them to see me not as the daughter of a prestigious family, but as David's wife. I also didn't want them to feel awkward or act differently around me. Stacy and Laura were dumbfounded upon hearing my story. Then, as if snapping back to reality, they suddenly started flattering me and my parents. "Rebecca has a dignity unlike ordinary people," said Stacy. Laura joined in. "It's an honor to be connected to a prestigious family." My parents looked at Stacy and Laura with disdain, which was precisely why I had kept quiet about my family. Now what they saw in me was not myself, but my parents' wealth. Finally, I told Stacy and Laura, "I can tolerate harassment directed at me, but I cannot forgive what you did to my precious son." Robert and John agreed, supporting me. Stacy and Laura apologized with pitiful faces, but it was too late. I had no intention of forgiving them. Having said what we wanted, David and I decided to leave the matter of Stacy and Laura's conduct to Robert and John, and went home. I thought Stacy and Laura would likely face a stern reprimand from Robert and John afterward. It turned out that just being scolded wasn't the end for Stacy and Laura. A few days later, they called me in a panic. Apparently, Robert had threatened Stacy with divorce, and she pleaded, "I'm about to be divorced. Can you please talk to your husband for me?" Laura was in a similar situation, asking desperately, "Can you lend me some money? I've been caught spending our savings and I'm in big trouble. I'm facing divorce." It seemed that Robert and John had each had discussions with their wives, during which it was discovered that Stacy and Laura had been recklessly spending the family savings on luxury brands. Their irresponsible behavior and bad character led to them being faced with divorce. Their divorce negotiations were contentious, but ultimately, both Stacy and Laura were divorced and kicked out of their homes. David declared that he would cut ties with the two and changed his contact information. I hadn't expected it to escalate to divorce, but I thought it was their just deserts. I later learned that after being divorced, both women accustomed to living luxuriously on Robert and John's earnings couldn't cope with sudden poverty. To maintain their lavish lifestyle, they accumulated debts by purchasing high-end brands, which led to a cycle of unmanageable interest payments and debt collection. John ended up with custody of my niece, who still occasionally plays with our family. Robert and John are kind people, and I plan to maintain a good relationship with them. On the other hand, my parents have been urging David to take over the family business, but he insists on continuing to work as an employee, as he has been doing. Even if David were to take over the company, I believe our life wouldn't change much, because I trust he's not the kind of person to be altered by money. I plan to continue trusting David and protecting the happiness of our family of 3.